and Miles, and this is Revolution Podcast. We have been going strong for going on 2 years. I'm pretty excited about this 2-year anniversary coming up in October. And we don't have anything planned just yet. But we're working on some juicy stuff. I will start off by saying we are going to stay true to our word about once we hit 1,000 patrons, we're going to be doing a live show somewhere in California. We are not saying where, and don't be so sure it's going to be in my home, the Bay Area. I've scouted out a location, a place where actually a good amount of guests are located. I'm not saying where just yet. But we're getting closer. We're over halfway there. So that's exciting. This show that you are about to hear is from the Saturday Free Show. So those of you that don't know, you guys are new listening to the show. This show is growing oh so rapidly. What we do is Tuesday and Thursday we do a live stream starting at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And if you'd like to be a part of that live stream, the best way is YouTube. YouTube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. Facebook.com/This is Revolution Podcast. We're on Periscope, definitely on Twitch. Wherever you're listening to this show, there are links in the description to all the places that you can watch it in live time. And you can comment, and as you'll see from... or as you'll hear, sorry, I keep saying see, what you'll hear from the show, we actually respond to the comments, and they don't all have to be super chats. We are not a super chat only show. We try to respond to as many comments. I think that there is a intelligent and humorous group in the chat, a community, if you will, that has been cultivated. And definitely, if you watch the show, you can tell when I have read something rather hilarious. Because I can't hide when I read some of the funny stuff. And big reason why, I stay off screen. But this conversation was with Professor Heidi Matthews that wrote a piece, Pascal, a while back, I would say a couple months ago. So, little backstory on what we do. I would say 3 days a week, we have what we like to tell our significant others, our production meetings, but they're usually just us gossiping and gabbing. But we do talk about the show and different directions we want to go with the show. But in one of these, Pascal had wanted to take on this question he called the crisis in male masculinity. And he was seeing that a lot of young men, especially young black men, were taking, and this is a recent phenomenon. He's not stuck in a time machine in 2014, 2015, are getting into Jordan Peterson. And Heidi Matthews wrote an interesting article. I will link the article as well, about the terminology behind toxic masculinity. And there's a term, and she didn't coin it, another professor did, the neoliberalization of feminism. So it's a feminism, sorry, that doesn't tackle, socioeconomic conditions. doesn't really tackle power. So the conversation was one I was a little worried about, because people get real sensitive when you talk about things that become part of what they think is like leftist lexicon, which is toxic masculinity. And I definitely think toxic behaviors exist. And I am sad to say that originally Angela Walker was supposed to be on the show and she couldn't make it. So it's definitely two guys interrogating this woman. So the optics, before you guys even try to comment, Angela wanted to be a part of the show. Some things came up, she couldn't make it. But it was a good show. And another thing we're going to start doing on the Saturday Free Show is having topics that we break down. So they definitely went into some more contemporary topics, but not so much just strictly news of the day. And also, we're adding a day Wednesday. So we're going to be doing 4 days a week. You want to be a part of that? Subscribe to the YouTube. You'll get alerted. Become a patron. You'll get all of it first and more. So thank you guys very much for making this one of the top programs on Apple Podcasts. And I am out.
Good afternoon and welcome to This is Revolution Podcast. I am your acting host, Pascal Robert. As you may already know, our normal host, Jason Miles, is still on vacation, so I am holding down the fort while he is away. This is our Saturday free show, meaning that we basically go as long as we can. We have an interesting show today where we're going to be talking about the crisis of masculinity, toxic masculinity, and what that means for American politics. We'll bring in our guests. Before we do that, I'll bring in my co-host for today, our man who used to be in Maine, but now is in Virginia, Marcus from the Left Flank Vets.
Hey, I gotta pretend to put in the little clapping and cheering thing because Jason's not here. But
Jason has the soundboard, and we do not have the soundboard, so that's the problem. Marcus, how are you doing down in Virginia, brother?
Good. You know, it's a little bit more humid, but otherwise, I think I'm taking to it well.
It's not like you can open up your kitchen sink and pull out lobsters like you could in Maine, right?
No, the lack of lobster. Although there is the amount of good crab. I'm pretty happy with that.
That's true. You are in the kind of Virginia, Maryland crab kind of vicinity.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, listen, because our guest is on a time constraint, let us introduce our guest. Our guest, Professor Heidi Matthews, is an assistant professor of law at Osgoode Hall Law School at York University in Canada. She researches and teaches in the areas of law of war, international criminal law, and law and sexuality. And she splits her time between Toronto and rural Newfoundland. Let us introduce for our audience the great Professor Heidi Matthews. Hello, Heidi. Welcome. Thank you for being on This Is Revolution podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I enjoy the fishing chat in the lead up. I relate relating to that in Newfoundland today.
No problem. So we know that, you are a moderately new mom and you have some issues that require you to not be able to give us your full time on our normal free show. So we're going to get right to the crux of the matter, if you don't mind. Both Marcus and I have read your wonderful article on toxic masculinity. What we'd like you to do for us is that, can you frame this crisis of masculinity discourse in terms of how it is being used by the reactionary right to gain acolytes in this particular political climate?
Oh, that's really interesting. Is it being used by the reactionary right? So I think part of what's going on is that mainstream feminism has become so sellable and buyable and take-upable in this, like, partially due to the Me Too sort of framework that we supposedly live in. That what we ordinarily would call conservatism or right-wing ideology is actually taken up quite a bit of space in mainstream feminism itself. So I'm not sure. I think it's a complicated question. I'm not totally sure if talking about if toxic masculinity is being leveraged by the right wing in like a transparent self-conceptualized sense by right-wingers. But I think you're quite right that, like, ideologically, the discourse is highly conservative in a number of different ways, right? But that gender is just, so easily takes up so much of the discursive space and actually does a lot of the conservative work while, wearing the it's not even forgive the I guess pun or metaphor, but kind of wears the fig leaf of progressivism or even leftism, but actually is doing a significant amount of what we would otherwise think of as conservative work. So there's a lot to unpack there, but anyway, we'll just start.
Okay, for our audience, can you kind of define toxic masculinity and also explain for, as your article does, what are the problems with that formulation as a concept as well?
Yeah, toxic masculinity is really interesting. Partly what irritated me, so, like, often I'll write from a place of, as we all do, right? From not sometimes it's anger, but sometimes it's just irritability. And I think that there's something really irritating to me about toxic masculinity and this idea that it should mean something, right? So on the one hand, I think you're quite right. Everyone's, like, really confused by it. Like, what are we actually talking about here? On the other hand, it's so in the discursive space, it's supposed to do all of that argumentative work for us without doing it, right? So you'll see, like, whatever, even if it's just like in the Twitter sphere or some other realm of public discourse, when somebody throws toxic masculinity as like a pejorative or a way of taking down another argument or destabilizing an interlocutor's position, we're almost supposed to like know what that means automatically, and asking the person to then unpack, well, what do you actually mean by toxic masculinity, immediately invokes kind of a defensive reaction. So all of that to say, it's this really weird term where on the one hand, we don't have any idea what it means. And on the other hand, we're all supposed to always already understand what it means. It's supposed to be given. It's supposed to make sense to us. I mean, for the purposes I'm not going to read the comments here. They're quite funny, but
never read the comments.
Like, I don't want, but it's funny. Thanks for the funniness. For the purposes of the piece that I wrote for Psyche magazine, I drew, you have to choose basically a definition to work with for the purposes of this piece, and so I went with some lines from the American Psychological Association's recent guidelines for practice with men and boys, I believe published about 3 years ago. And actually, it's funny because the document itself doesn't actually talk about toxic masculinity, but it is exactly all of the same stand-ins that we see, if we're looking up, what is toxic masculinity in the New York Times. So there are a lot of like explainer pieces, and essentially what they are like a way of describing hegemonic, ideologically rooted stereotypes about harmful or unhealthy masculine ways of performing masculinity, right? So it's basically about unhealthy gender performance, both supposedly from the perspective of men and boys themselves, and then, of course, obviously from the perspective of, right, so the binary opposite being women and girls. Already we're seeing the picture being incredibly bifurcated, binary, lacking in complexity, right? The whole discussion, ironically to me, doesn't actually admit of a more complex discussion of different sorts of gender performances and identities. And so really it's basically putting masculinity and hegemonic stereotypical ideas about what that is, and counterposing that to sort of femininity and, again, highly ideological stereotyped conceptions of what femininity is. And so for toxic masculinity, like some examples, again, from the APA document would be like, a general antithesis, like attitude of anti-femininity or, suspectness of femininity, commitment to sort of competitiveness and achievement. I'm reading from just a bit from the piece now, eschewal of the appearance of weakness, right? So this idea that men and boys are sort of incapable of being vulnerable, and that's kind of at the root of bad male behavior, and also a risk proneness to violence and adventure. So this, we have like a combination of stuff here. At the one hand, this idea of men being like inherently violent or more at risk for violence, and then that's counterposed to like some things that we might think are actually really good, like just being interested in adventure and risk. So yeah.
And it kind of seems like this caricature of like the Teddy Roosevelt, bully riding across the frontier and subduing, the beasts and all of this bullcrap, but also too of like the leading to like, oh, as I drown my emotions in whiskey, I become this violent, enraged man, and who knows, right? But something that I found like interesting in your piece that I think we tied in like a kind of another sense, but of like this is neoliberal kind of like performance ideologies type of thing, and like a lot of times we would kind of deconstruct that stuff when it has to term with like blackness and whiteness or white supremacy and all of these things. And you kind of like actually I think you do a great job of doing the same thing, in which case you're saying having all these focus largely, especially on these like individual behaviors that fall on actually the mothers of the, it's on these mothers, the parents, it's like they like, you need to do all of these things to make sure that the toxic masculinity monster isn't fed and allowed to grow. But actually, if there is a man that is against femininity or all of these things, that might not be as toxic if we actually had a society where, there was a more egalitarian distribution of the things that people need. But due to the power structures that we do have, that's when you start tying into these things that in these neoliberal spaces, they try and throw away as toxic masculinity. But, as you addressed in your article, it just kind of just eventually ties to the greater power structures. And I think you're, kind of alluding to in your last answer of the lack of complexity that actually they deliver. And this toxic masculinity answer is more of inserted in some of these class constructs that we, talk about. And I guess, could you speak more on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. So, I mean, again, like it's a very complicated conversation. And I think, there's so many layers to be unpacked here. And so I wouldn't want to be seen as like objecting to this idea that there are negative gender performances as such. But I think part of the problem, right, with the discourse around this idea of toxicity and masculinity as being attached is that it actually, it takes the question of gender and its performance and sort of attaches one idea of gender identity with this idea of negativity. And then the seed is planted, as you said, right? So it's kind of like there's this, I like the way you put that, this kind of subconscious or subliminal or constantly sublimated threat of the dangerous male who will rise if women kind of don't do their part to check him, right? And other men too. So part of the way this is marketed, so they're we've all seen these things, but it's once you start turning your mind to it, it's sort of everywhere, right? Like it's not just in school curriculum, though actually it's coming up quite a bit there, but in all kinds of places, there are these after school programs, right? Primarily in the US targeted against Black teenagers who are teaching them how to be good men in a way that
reinforces
performs. Yeah, exactly. It's you need to man up, but here's the way to man up, not, do it this way and not that way. And so the thing, part of what really strikes me there is the way in which as you said, it's individualized, right? So I've always really rejected, even the idea of motherhood. Now I have two twins that are one, but so here I am in this ambivalent position where I'm consuming material directed at mothers in a kind of perverse and obsessive way, because it's like a train wreck, right? You can't look away. It's hideous, this whole this enormous world of stuff that's asking you to make sure that you don't raise an asshole if you have a boy. It's totally insane. And I'm what? So there, that's on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I suppose partly as a teacher, I'm a university professor, so I'm not teaching kids, but I'm part of, I teach criminal law. And what strikes me is the way in which this discourse lends itself so easily to techniques and technologies of surveillance, right? And so that's this stuff comes up in the schools, who gets surveilled in the schools, certainly, especially in the US, it's going to be boys, it's going to be poor boys, it's going to be racialized in particular. Black boys in Canada it will be that. It will also be, Indigenous folks as well. So there's this, and then we see this, it's another iteration basically of the school to prison pipeline that folks talk about, right? I think that toxic masculinity thinking is really closely aligned with this other system in a way that we're very uncomfortable talking about directly.
One of the things that I found interesting about your piece and that you exposed almost early on is how toxic masculinity discourse oftentimes, as you just mentioned, results in racialized treatment of boys, i.e. targeting Black and brown boys, and also classed in that also targeting poor and working class boys. I kind of view this whole toxic masculinity discourse as a way to render males who are of a certain class and color position to social control methodology through the state or private entities because of the increased precarity and lack of job utility of working class men in general, and the overall preference for capital for female labor, because female labor is always more inexpensive than male labor as well. So can you talk about that somewhat, the racialized and class component, as well as the overall utility of this discourse to capitalism overall?
That's a large and important question. I'm not sure I'll be able to do it justice, but thanks for that. Yeah, and I also just would love to hear I mean, obviously it's embedded in your questions, but the take that both of you have on these questions as well. So it's not, I'd love to this to be more of a conversation than sort of me answering, but I mean, I don't know if you remember. So one thing that it's been irritating me for ages, but do you remember this campaign that was called like Hollaback? And it was a way of, it was like all over Twitter and Facebook and stuff. And it was a way of promoting the idea that catcalling of various sorts is actually like public violence against women, right?
Criminalization of catcalling. I've actually read law review articles about this. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So there've been campaign, like a bunch of like supposedly public awareness campaigns, and who could reject a public awareness campaign that's like meant to help us think more, in more complex ways about the way that we behave with one another and whatever. Like all of that looks really positive and unobjectionable on the face of it, in the way that so much of toxic masculinity discourse looks good and unobjectionable on the face of it. But really what that particular campaign, but you're right, it's one of like many, was then criticized and exposed a little bit because the men that it was picturing, right, when it was going around sort of taking videos and calling out men for catcalling women, they're like racialized working class men who were like, doing construction or picking up garbage or just like in public more, right? So even just being visible in the space. And then the idea, I think, was partly that being, any kind of explicit, uninvited in the sense of explicitly invited sexualized discourse in the public space was necessarily violent, right? And so that's just one example of the way in which it's just a way of disciplining expression in general, and then attaching that discipline to our overall approach to disciplining sexuality. So I'm not sure I have like, I think there's a book length project, on your question, but the way in it's just, this discourse just lends itself to an arena where we're able to like basically find another way to put down poor racialized men for, expressing anything that essentially white women find objectionable in the public space.
Now, do you think that the focus on toxic masculinity is somewhat of an indictment on the direction to which liberal feminism is focusing its energy in contemporary society?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I mean, so Catherine Rottenberg writes on this idea of neoliberal feminism, in fact, right? So it's not even just liberal feminism itself, right? Has basically given way to this like marketized, privatized universe of like feminist ways of being in the world, right?
Yes, queen.
So I don't know, like, I'm sure you have your own examples, which again, I'd love to hear because there are just so many of them. And and so, which is why it's so easy for everyone to be a feminist, right? So it's almost like, the imperative here is that, okay, all women, and indeed all people in general, need to identify with the idea of feminism in order to be taken seriously as interlocutors or like people in the world at all. But if everybody identifies with feminism, then what does it actually mean as a political project? It's like, again, Rottenberg talks about neoliberal feminism as defanged feminism. So it's not a political project that can actually make a substantive claim on the state, and certainly not a claim that would have anything to do with like, you know, more actual material equality or you know, increased opportunities or anything that we might be concerned with as, you know, left-wing political thinkers. So so there's a real tension there, right? Like if everyone's a feminist, then no one's a feminist in the way that we actually would want to care about. And toxic masculinity plays into that just very smoothly, again, in a way that has all of these other surveillance-based racialized mechanisms attached to it, right? So part of the genius of it is it's actually doing all of this work, like so many different levels of work at the same time.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to like wonder if this, and I think we've had like a lot of discussions even about the academia and like kind of just like the just hive, you know, as far as just like how much action goes on. And I like say action, I just mean like discourse and like these, you know, this guy because
no action like, allowed anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It was like, but you have these ideas that have to like bounce and like they like create enough energy, but it's all kind of a way to like try to explain away, you know, these social ills, you know, without going to the actual root of the problem. And then, you know, and like this could end up, in a myriad of ways. But if you're talking about this, you know, toxic masculinity stuff, I think like that's where kind of like it kind of makes sense to me. Where, yeah, like obviously there are behaviors, actions, you know, that get reinforced in society. But the idea that like as soon or even beforehand, you know, like, oh, hey, did you, you know, play Beethoven or Bach, you know, oh, well, you chose Beethoven. That's 2 toxic masculinity points that you put into your baby, and you only get it to 100 until you created the asshole. But it's kind of just a way for like people in academia to, you know, get their cash fill of, you know, off of writing these books that, you know, I mean, and so we talk about white fragility, you know, as kind of one of those examples, like on the race side of things, where it's just like a whole lot of talk and fervor, just the bees buzzing, for nothing other than just to hear themselves buzz. But how that reverberates into society, I guess, is like, and that's the thing is like dangerous that you're all talking about is like the, you know, potential for laws to be written based off of these, you know, neoliberal nonsense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like I have to tie this. I mean, my overall arching part of the reason why I'm interested in this question of toxic masculinity and targeting gender performances as like you know, the root of actual material problems in the world is that, yeah, sure, of course, anybody, one can use any number of different like frameworks through which to reflect and refract like toxic behavior or bad or negative or violent or whatever you want to call it sort of behavior. We like talking about toxicity now, partly because I think that kind of like, you know, on the one hand, it gives us a certain amount of control and autonomy. On the other hand, it kind of takes it away at the same time, right? So masculinity is at once something that we have control over, but it's also something like dangerous and out there that needs to be policed because it's like possibly contagious. And so, so there's a play of those two things going on at the same time. I certainly think that, I mean, yeah, just investing. As I said, the larger question I think is for me came out of inquiries that I'm making into the way in which we sort of police social and public behavior with the economic consequences that are attached to that through the lens of sexuality and gender performance, right? And so as always, sex does so much work. Gender performance here is doing a lot of work that it simply doesn't need to. There's, you know, I think we could have a discussion about the things. Mostly, I think this would be possible to have a discussion about the things that are really problematic, like at a root level in society from a political perspective, without necessarily attaching those things to gender and gender performance. Although gender and gender performance can then exacerbate, deepen, and highlight the things that are going wrong outside of that. And so, I mean, I think part of that would be, so that's a little bit abstract, but in the piece I talk about kind of, if we were really concerned about real toxicity, not that that's a thing out there to be found, but, again, the root things that we would want to worry about, like commitments to militarism, and like we're seeing that today with the undying or the refusal to die of the forever war, especially in certain contexts of like progressive or left-wing circles, right? And so, if you want to be really, really concerned with that level of violence, right? So imperialism, right? Like that's actually happening, all around us on a daily basis, but we're refusing to talk about. If you wanted to be concerned about imperialism, I mean, sure, fine, be concerned about imperialism. Be concerned about the men who are responsible for that, and call them toxic men or something. But I think that the idea there is just meant to like kind of put the lie out there, right? So yeah, sure, militarism is masculine in some way or whatever, but again, the way in which, and here comes the sex and gender performance, right? So we need to protect these people because they fuck with women.
Yeah.
Whatever, where I'm going with here.
Yeah, no, and like I mean, and so I agree 100%, and like that's the thing is like it's putting it like really in the face, because like we don't know, right? So it's just like, let's just take Afghanistan. We don't know how many innocent civilians have been killed, right? We guess there's around 100,000, some a little bit below, some a little bit above. But we have to guess because we never cared about the Afghan women to count the ones that we killed in the beginning of the war. And it took a large international effort to even get us to count, to do so. And I mean, I think all of this is actually happening while this toxic masculinity discourse is coming up. And to the even, like the things that go on in the military.
Yeah,
Vanessa Guillen is one of the major stories that came out. Like if there was a real concern with toxic masculinity, yeah, imperialism or even the way the military operates in general would be enough to say like, oh, well, we need to stop this immediately. Look at all this toxic masculinity that's happening. But obviously that's not the case, because imperialism needs to go along, but poor people also need to be policed in a myriad of different ways, whether it's like just between the actual discourse and talking that we do all the way down to the police state and everything like that.
Yeah, and they feed one another, right? Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Pascal, go ahead.
Well, we have a question here from our producer. How does toxic masculinity discourse impact the work environment in academia? Gee, I wonder why he wants to know about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know from his perspective, but I'm very lucky personally to live in like I work at a pretty left-wing law school, like if such a thing actually does exist.
I'm about to say, you're definitely not in the United States.
Which sounds crazy. Yeah, I mean, so I'm like the luckiest person on the planet in the sense that I've found this weird group of people who's like totally brilliant and has good politics. And so I myself I often feel very protected because of that. So I'm not sure what other folks are experiencing on a daily basis. I mean, certainly my own interventions kind of, that are like extremely critical of things like Me Too, don't tend to get taken well by a lot of people on the left, in the sense. So yeah, I mean, it's hard. There's not, as I said, there's not a lot of space to make this sort of argument. It's just not, I don't know. I wish I had a better answer to that. But Jean, what's your experience?
Yeah, no,
I feel like this is a self-animated question.
No, sorry. Yes, this was a very self-indulgent question. But I was just thinking in terms of the connection between academia as a place where a lot of these ideas are produced, and also how that ideology gets implemented in academic spheres. And, often the rank hypocrisy you see within academia with people often not conforming to the ideology that they're espousing, and still having extremely problematic behaviors taking place. And then a counterexample with, feminism and Me Too being used as kind of a tool almost for certain people within academia to basically liquidate the opposition and get the good positions. That was kind of what I was thinking. So I'm going to sneak off camera.
I think is this Gene just admitting that he didn't get the promotion he deserves because someone lobbed a toxic masculinity charge? Is that what's going on here?
Maybe.
I mean, I suppose I'll say this, like I've seen a lot of bad behavior in academia. Like, so if we want to talk about like abuse or whatever, right? Abusive situations, we want to use the language of like power imbalance without really defining it or whatever. I'm happy to do that. Like, in terms of abuse and power imbalance in academia, for me, honestly, a lot of that, like, of course, there's like sexuality imbues every moment of our lives and all of that stuff. But what the worst instances that I've seen have not really had very much to do overtly or even subtextually with sex itself. Right. So there's this huge discourse of like, oh, professors wanting to sleep with their students or all this nonsense. And had a lot more to do with just sadistic intellectual figures wanting to retain control over their sort of like personal intellectual fiefdoms. And that it doesn't have a gendered component in my experience. That's been that intense. So I don't know if you guys remember this case of the Avital Ronell, or so. I'm getting that wrong now because I have to look it up. But I have baby brain. I don't remember names anymore. but
I remember that very well.
Yeah, the NYU professor. And so, like that was such a crazy case. And it was at the beginning of Me Too, and it was posited as sort of like an example of where Me Too might come home to roost in academia. And what actually was going on was this very complicated situation where you've got like mostly a lesbian identified professor with mostly a gay identified student. And there was a lot of like crazy behavior in that scenario but then there were like some sexual undertones, but like it was just very complicated. They weren't having sex. It was part of in my mind anyway, of course, like only being able to read publicly available documents and all of that, but had to do with an intense psychodrama that involved a certain amount of like narcissism and yeah, just basic like toxic narcissistic personality disorder, and using a student to sort of project that and live that and make that real. And I've seen stuff like that, myself, often between, identified women and other identified women with no sexual content at all. And there's just I guess this is a long-winded way of saying that it's very frustrating to me that there isn't a space for having a discussion about the way in which these power dynamics may not have anything to do with sex. And if they do have anything to do with sex, it might be quite tangential. And that the whole sort of like material reality of what it means to live and operate in academia today as a graduate student just doesn't really come into the picture at all.
Well, one of the concerns that I have, and when my initial question was really about, is that how the observations about the way in which discourse like toxic masculinity can be used in a way that are frankly unjust. That recognition and the overall quote unquote questioning over the goals of neoliberal feminism, those questions and those analyses are being done in the American context on the reactionary right. I would argue that it's done oftentimes in a rather sexist and reductionist way, i.e. people like Jordan Peterson. There's a very well-known book out now. I think it's called The Boy Crisis or The Crisis of Boys. I forget the actual title. Yeah. But and all of this harping on data about how young boys are underperforming in school. You talked about a bit of it in your article, how boys are showing less intellectual interest. Boys are graduating at lower rates. All of this hyper focus that is premised on arguing that young boys and men are being displaced, and the blame is being laid upon, quote unquote, women and the radical feminism. And it's because, of course, we know that we are in a period of economic precarity, and we do have phenomenon that are purported to exist, like incel culture, if you will. What I'm concerned about and what I'm seeing cross-racially, it's fueling an echo chamber in online spaces of young men listening to these right-wing personalities and buying these narratives that are inuring them more and more to almost kind of like Trumpian conservatism. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Are you seeing that in Canada as well, even though Jordan Peterson is a, creation of your homeland?
Yeah, he's like my next door neighbor almost. No, we both live in Toronto. Actually, Canada, there's like an interesting side discussion about how Canada seems to be like a hotbed for the creation of these people. So he's like not the only one. There's a Proud Boys guy is also Canadian, whatever. So, yeah, Canada exports intellectual. Yeah, there's like a whole bunch of them, which I would love to get my head around. There's something going on there. There's really a lot of that in Canada itself and in Toronto for whatever reason. So I'm not sure what the question is. Like it, like the, like the purchase of Peterson as a person in the world.
Well, I mean, I think
sorry, I'm not trying to be obtuse. I just don't know. I'm not.
No, I'm just saying that the phenomenon that I find disturbing is how, and I think you're right to talk about how toxic masculinity is abused in the neoliberal capitalist order for nefarious purposes often. But what I'm seeing is that the kind of class left critique that you're bringing to the phenomenon is not what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is a reactionary right-wing masculine gender discourse that basically is premised on saying the women have gone too far. We need to put men back in control of things, or else it's the end of the world.
Yeah. So the men's rights people. So the whole idea of this crisis of boyhood in particular, so masculinity, but also boyhood. So and the piece tries to get at this a bit, is the way in which it's not just about masculinity. We're very, very obsessed with like boys and children in this discourse. That started with these men's rights people, like a decade or something like that ago, maybe 15 years ago. And I think you're quite right. It's been taken up by like Peterson, the Proud Boys, and others in that circle. And there's this like intensification of a certain kind of masculine ideal as a way of I don't know, whatever, countering the threat of liberal feminism. I mean, I also want to counter the threat of liberal feminism, right? Like we all do. And so the question is like, how do you do that? So it makes sense, that if you for people who are wanting like a way into the universe and somebody that they can identify with or whatever, for whatever reason, Peterson and others like him, I think people find that they resonate and that they're like easily digestible and accessible. And it's also like another man, right? So there is a sense in which, identification with maleness there feels safe in a way that it wouldn't feel by taking up a more radical left-wing position, which is kind of the the in that I'm looking for, right? Like what would be actually a left critique of the same phenomenon that people on the right are taking up. And the problem on the left is that there's just very little appetite for actually going in and being like, well, how do we criticize, how do we even identify that neoliberal feminism exists, and that how do we actually critique it? So there's just a lot of fear around unpacking some foundational concepts and commitments, right? So there just aren't many people, I don't think, who would have the sort of class politics necessary, to do the political work that people like us are kind of interested in doing in the space of sex and gender.
So does that mean that this discourse is resigned to be taken up by reactionary males who want to go back to like Mad Men type societies where they can, sexually harass women at their job comfortably, like the good old days in their eyes?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know if so it's just because, part of that, I think part of what's bound up in this is, my dad just came downstairs and I'm like, what are you doing here? My part of what's bound up in that is that it's very difficult to have a space to talk about sexual expression. So this is my own sort of deeply held conviction, is that part of the frustration and the appeal of people like Peterson would be that they have a language for rejecting certain concepts of whatever feminism and feminist control, in a way that refracts, like, for them, what they see as a more positive and productive masculinity. Like, we know it's not, but they see it as that. But strangely also in a way that isn't that sexual, right? So it's not that Peterson himself is not like coming with an alternate theory of sexuality. And I don't know or unless I'm missing it, like I'm not an expert on Peterson, but he seems to be like in many ways himself like quite asexual and sort of like saying to men, like, you need to focus on like getting your shit together and cleaning up your room and like maybe masturbating less or whatever. I don't know. And and I think what would be helpful in all of this, so that we know that doesn't actually get taken up fully, right? So nobody is saying, actually, you're right, I need to masturbate less, right? They might be taking, like, I don't think anyone that's taking root in the world. But that's kind of the oddness of it, is that there's a sterility to that discourse that's really interesting to me. And so I wonder, this is a long way of saying, what I wonder is what would happen actually if we, for lack of a better word, like injected a discourse that was more sex positive and capable of like tying together the political concerns to a more positive space around sexuality and sexual expression, right? Because both sides end up coming down in a very it's my father-in-law just where people, both sides, like the Peterson side that you're kind of talking about, and then also the sort of neoliberal side, are very, very skeptical of like sex and sexuality, and they're both attacking it, right? So it's like, I don't think Peterson necessarily wants to go back to Mad Men. I think he like wouldn't know what to do in a Mad Men situation. You know what I mean? That's my sense anyway. So my sort of my whole theory is like, or attempt at theorizing all these issues, is to say, like, what would it mean to have a language, a more positive and politically positive theory of sex that was able to get taken up in these spaces? But anyway, I think my time is running out.
Yeah,
here.
I wanted to ask, is like, do you need to discuss with your father-in-law about how his toxic behavior is ruining you? He's silencing women right now.
Nobody knows what I do. Like Heidi's in the basement. This was great. Thank you so much.
It seems like you're probably constrained by your family and in-laws and obligations that you had that you told us of earlier, Heidi. And we appreciate you coming on. Hopefully you'll be willing to come on again when you have more free time to be able to discuss any of your contemporary work or more analysis on these subject matters of gender, power, capital, and class and race as well.
Yeah, I'd love to continue the conversation. And thanks so much for the great show that you're putting on and the work that you do.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you. Enjoy the Canadian hinterlands.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Professor Heidi Matthews.
Man, that was some toxic stuff coming out of the family there. Just men coming in and bullying.
To relax, calm down.
It was very, very toxic. Very toxic.
There's nothing toxic about it.
Great questions, guys. Really interesting interview. I think we don't get that topic enough, to be honest. That is, it's almost like it's kind of a parallel conversation to a lot of the conversations Pascal, Jason, and Marcus have about black politics. But obviously in a slightly different track. But really
I feel like it's like if there was like you go to the like neoliberal like bullshit explainer ice cream shop and one of the 31 flavors, or at least two, like one you've got this like like the blackness and white supremacy discourse. You could get a few scoops of that, but it's like you could also get a few scoops of the toxic masculinity. But it's it comes from the same.
Believe that all of this is a neoliberal conspiracy that comes out of academics who are overpaid and who have less values than they're worth, and they're just jacking up society.
I am not overpaid.
I am saying that like there's these ideas and like there's the whole discussion. It comes from somewhere, right?
Somebody wants to know: Beanie in the summer is Gene stealing Tim Pool's?
It's because my hair is so long. I'm too scared to get a haircut, guys. Like, I'm in Springfield, and like I am terrified of going to the hairdresser. It's not even the hairdresser; it's all the people who come in the hairdresser and give me COVID. I'm already having a panic attack because I went to Costco and there was like a Costco outbreak of COVID in this place because people, it's toxic masculinity and don't want to wear masks,
Why don't you have Sarah cut your hair, man?
Don't bring that topic up. She's watching right now.
Oh.
Why? Oh, so in other words, you're afraid of having Sarah.
She's offered and you said no.
She's done a great job on Zal's hair, on baby Zal's hair. She does a fantastic job.
You just don't trust that she'll do as fantastic a job with yours. You could say it.
Yeah, I mean, I will only say that Sarah is a very skilled hairdresser of a 2-year-old. So. But yeah, I thought that was a really wife guy confirmed exactly. But I thought that was a really great conversation. I really hope we can have more conversations like that. I think we need to find more people who are making that interesting critique. And I think the endpoint she left on was an extremely interesting one, whereby both the kind of neoliberal feminism and the Jordan Peter reaction to feminism are like kind of asexual. You know what I mean? Sex is actually kind of tangential to it. Super interesting. So I really enjoyed that, guys.
Well, and like I think that's like one thing, and even like Pascal is like picking up on is they're the only one that's talking about it, and for the audience, which like you look at fucking Jordan Peterson's, and you take away the hate views, still a pretty substantial amount of people who I guess feel aggrieved enough by even the talk of denouncing toxic masculinity that they're looking for some way to explain why being masculine blah 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 is actually necessary. I think it would be beneficial, right? And like just like Pascal was saying, is like if there is a place where that's this kind of discourse is like just to say like, hey, you want to explain why this is kind of like just some nonsense, here's a left critique of it that's actually based in reality, and not just, well, you see, you can't masturbate, you gotta keep up all your masculinity and like whatever the fucking Jordan Peterson shit is.
They're really against jerking off. Like the Proud Boys have like rules about like you're like not allowed to jerk off. It's like super weird kind of behavior.
Well, if you touch your own penis, you're gay. So that's you're not allowed to touch.
That's part of their like.
I mean, I don't know.
I have no idea.
I don't know about that, but I know that like one of the sensationalist things was that they weren't allowed to they weren't allowed to have a wank by themselves. You know, they had to. They could do it within the presence of another. It's like, but it's all these kind of super bizarre rules to regulate their sexuality, which, you know, it speaks to a pathology. But I think more broadly, one thing that Heidi kind of brought up is the notion of the two-front war that the left has to fight. It's like you've got to fight this war against a reactionary right at the same time as waging a war against neoliberal ideology. And it's a really hard balance because, you know, you either end up liquidating yourself into the Democratic Party or you end up becoming a functional right-winger.
Well, you end up becoming what we have on the left today, which is a kind of feckless, useless kind of, you know, constellation of people who are not really doing much at all. Anyway, the sexual is political seems relevant to this discussion. Thank you, Tom Hall. Zizek's article, The Sexual is Political. I didn't know that Zizek had an article called The Sexual is Political.
Yeah, he has an article on everything. Zizek, he does like to write on a lot of different topics, some of which he is more informed about than others. I will say that. I don't want to anger Doug Lane, who is a big Zizek fan. I've actually had dinner with Zizek, and he was an interesting guy. He was like nice. He wasn't like one of these like rock star academics who was kind of like was kind of up his own ass. He was fun talking and things like that. Bit of a weird guy, but you know, I think that's what's part of the appeal. Guy who refuses to eat. There we go. We have some weird comments today. A guy who refuses to eat banana whole because he doesn't want to look gay. That's some bizarre stuff.
That's a little weird. But since we have Marcus here, one of the things that we wanted to pivot to in the wake of the departure of our guest, Professor Heidi Matthews, was what's up with the reaction to Biden's pullout from Afghanistan and how people are like, yo, Biden's got to go. What's going on there, Marcus Farkas?
It's wild. It's wild.
Well, I have a clip for you guys. If you
what?
Snap. Yeah,
you got a clip? What?
Okay.
You're gonna be making Marcus is gonna beatbox soon, man.
He's gonna. Yeah, I've just got to get the clip up. Sorry, I thought we were gonna go to Larry Elder first, so I put that one up. But I will put.
I will say, while Gene's gearing it up, what it seems what we have is like the obsession for obviously the media, but they are absolutely bloodthirsty warmongers, and Biden has to do everything he can to just like stop this one war, and it's.
Well, let's check this clip out. This was something I found a little bit earlier, so we'll just put this on.
We're getting ready to turn it up a little here. Think for a minute how much our country has changed since Joe Biden has entered the White House back in January. He has taken our nation from first to worst in almost every category. And I can promise you that if a football coach in Alabama performed as poorly as Biden has as president, he'd already be fired and looking for another job. I think it's time for Joe Biden to be impeached.
I think it's time for Joe Biden to be impeached.
I mean,
yeah.
Just so you know, that was Lieutenant Governor Will Answorth of the great state of Alabama.
Football coach in Alabama.
But everybody know there ain't football coaches in Alabama. Don't do that, man. We do great here. All wins, W's. So I mean, it's like this. I mean, context, right? Pullout has been, marred with disaster. There's there's no way that, I think this would have happened without, some type of fucking consequence, right? People miss the big picture. This is kind of something that I was entangled in on the Ben Dixon show of the source of a lot of this within Afghanistan is the United States to begin with. But hey, let's fast forward to now. Biden actually doing the right thing of pulling people out. It is an extremely dangerous operation with the factors that you have around. But what you have now, and it's going to get a whole lot worse, is, you know, the media is now going to be pushing this idea that there would have been something else that Biden could have done to stop U.S. lives from being lost, or the, you know, 100 plus Afghans that were killed as well. So like now, like they I think it was last night they had announced that they had done an airstrike and killed the people who had planned the attack. But this isn't going to be good enough. And this is wild, because even now you're starting to get articles of like the parents of some of those service members who were killed, talking about how Biden turned their back on the service members and all this, that, and whatever. But I mean, the answer is still the same. Get out by the 31st and then stop doing imperialism.
What do you think of the arguments some are making that Biden getting out of Afghanistan isn't the problem, but the order of operations were faulty? He should have pulled out the civilians, the translators, the people who were collaborating with the U.S., got them out first and pulled the military out last to avoid the kind of tragedies that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is where like you kind of would have to just, I don't know, we call rock walk it, right? Rehearsal of concept, you know, like you utilize the fucking players on the board and let's like play that out. Because if we start pulling out a lot of translators, people that worked with us and everything like that, you're actually pulling out some of the, you know, like people in Afghanistan that are doing the work to make sure that Afghanistan, or at least the part that was controlled under the, you know, Afghan government, you know, that keeps going. And then you talk about like, so if you start, you know, pulling some people out saying, hey, that we're leaving, if this happens earlier, like then this just speeds up the clock for the amount of territories that the Taliban takes over. It basically, you know, like at the end of the day, you're going to be left with a small area that the U.S. is trying to secure to get the last few people out, which is going to be a very dangerous situation, no matter when you do it, no matter how you do it. But the idea that like there could be some type of secret exfil of like literally over 100,000 Afghans plus all of the U.S. military personnel, it's, you know, that's impossible.
Okay. I would add to that. You know, perhaps on some marginal level, there could have been, you know, better preparation for this and things like that. No doubt about that. Although that's probably less of an issue with Biden and more of an issue with the military high command and the kind of people running the operation. Americans are very reticent about criticizing military leadership, even when they make mistakes. And after all, you know, these guys have been running these wars for 20 years, and they're good at knocking over regimes, but they are not capable of building them back up again. And there needs to be a reckoning, and there needs to be accountability with that, not just on a political level, but on a bureaucratic level. The second point that I would make is, in order to have a more orderly evacuation, America would have had to have admitted that it had lost the war. Because when you lose a war, you make a negotiation with the victorious side and you arrange a more orderly transfer of power, right? But of course, America cannot admit to being defeated, because ultimately, you know, America could just nuke Afghanistan and win, right? You know, they could like do this, but you know, there's like an ideological problem in that if you cannot accept that you've been defeated or your project has been defeated, then how do you do anything other than what happened, which is like pull out, pretend that the Afghan government is going to hang on for a bit longer, and then when it doesn't, act all surprised about it. So this comes down to the issue of the kind of ideology that pervades both the American military-industrial complex and also the political elite in the country, which cannot fathom the inability of the American state, the American military, to execute a project, because they are very good at toppling regimes, very professional in executing wars. But when it comes to nation building, that's like, you know, taking a hammer when you need a screwdriver to the field. And I would just want to address this super chat. I think Biden probably did think he had had the credentials to pull out. And I think ultimately it's still early doors. We still have plenty of time till 2024. Let's see how people look at this Afghan pullout in 3 or 4 years, because there's a lot of belly aching in the Beltway media who are very attached to these imperial projects, who have an utter bootlicking venality when it comes to dealing with military personnel. They all act as if they just look at Brian Williams, and his stolen valor, are all obsessed with being, treated seriously. They're obsessed with these security apparatus people. Those people are upset. But in the broader country, I don't know. I think a lot of people are like, well, this is messy, but whatever. At least we're not going to be in this war. And then when you have a situation in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, guess what? People aren't going to care what happens in Afghanistan with the Taliban, however crappy that looks, right? That's not going to be swinging people in Ohio to vote unless the Taliban capture like 25 Americans and start chopping their heads off on TV.
Yeah.
Then you change the ball game. Then you have Iran hostage crisis.
Well, and this is where Biden and like the past few days, I've literally had to go, not literally, but I feel sick. I feel sick at the amount of like defense that I've been doing at the Biden administration, because like at the end of the day, this should be seen as, hey, this is the right decision. And if there are little like, Monday morning quarterback of, hey, we could have done this, we could have done that. Because Gene, I think that is the most logical way it could have gone better, was that the U.S. first realize and work between the Afghan government and the Taliban for the Taliban to roll into control, taking over the security apparatus, us openly saying, yes, all of the things that we had driven the ANA to try and fight the Taliban and ISIS, we're now going to hand over to the Taliban, just roll it all back. And like maybe they like we're talking about the prisoners, all of that had gotten released, there could have been a different deal with that. But at the end of the day, the United States can't take an L. Like even the way that we talk about Korea, Vietnam, all of these things, like we can't take a loss. And that's what it would have taken to actually had some type of responsible retreat from Afghanistan. Given that, it still would have been a very dangerous operation when you get down to the last few people, to even say where, hey, this attack, maybe could not have, been mitigated. But I do find it interesting as well that one of the generals that was like a spokesperson for the DOD was actually, I mean, he didn't thank the Taliban, but he said the Taliban had already stopped other attacks. There were supposed to be other attacks, and he was crediting the Taliban for stopping those. So it's right there in America's faces. Like, we are now working with the Taliban. There's never been a problem with the United States working with brutal regimes before. All they have to do now is flip that narrative of, okay, hey, Taliban was bad, but this is a different Taliban.
The new Taliban. But let's sorry, Pascal, you go ahead.
Does anyone believe that if Trump had not made the agreement to negotiate with the Taliban to extricate American troops, that Biden would still be pulling troops out right now? In other words, if Trump didn't make this deal, would we still have troops in Afghanistan right now, or would Biden be negotiating a withdrawal?
I think we'd be there. I think we'd be there.
I think Biden might have tried to organize a withdrawal, but he wouldn't have been able to do it as quickly because he had a lot of the groundwork laid for him by the Trump administration. So, he was just executing a plan that was already in place to a certain degree.
I mean, at the end of the day, what is there a foreign policy under the Biden administration that's not an extension of the Trump administration?
Yeah, U.S. foreign policy is always about imperial management. It's like the debate, like people on the left, not everybody on the left, a lot of people on the left mistake imperial management debates for anti-imperialism, right? Like when people were like, "Oh, Trump's more isolationist." Trump was just a more, like Trump's big problem was like, why didn't we take the oil, right?
Yeah.
So he was more like well, if we're going to do imperialism, let's take the oil, right? This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Instead of like this more complicated type of imperialism, which is more about extracting money from the American population to buy for bloated military budgets, Trump's like, let's go back to the system where we just steal their resources, right?
And that's where, it's like Trump is just a good con man. He's a marketer. The fact that Trump was able to get those answers right of let's pull out is because it was overwhelmingly popular, right? Like he had already like years ago had picked up on like, hey, the Iraq war wasn't a fucking good option. And that's like if that's thing too is like, oh, if you're gonna do it, well then why didn't you take the oil? To the point where he was like, oh yeah, well we're pulling out of supporting our the Kurds in Syria, but now we're going back. Why? To protect the oil.
What do but like to pivot to Pascal's initial question, what about this impeachment talk? Because I kind of think it was inevitable. You could have elected anybody. The Republicans will be talking about impeaching.
I'm hearing impeachment. I'm hearing 25th Amendment. I mean, everyone's like, Biden he's not competent. He's not capable to govern. He's got to go, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I will admit this. Biden didn't handle too much. Some of his media appearances were poorly handled. The whole bending the head at the podium, acting like, oh, God, I'd rather be eating ice cream right now than doing this. That look was not a good one.
Did you hear the question, though?
The question was a bit ridiculous, yes.
And this is where, like, when once again, this is even saying this makes me feel like shit. When Biden put his head down, like, fuck this motherfucker, Steve Ducey, I have never felt more in tune with Joseph Robinette Biden in my life, because this, like, I think because at the end of the day, this isn't like an anti-imperialism thing. I think that Biden 100% just wants to say, hey, we want to stop digging this hole and just move the shovels and the people and start digging on China, like South China. We need more people in that hole, right? This is a transfer, not really an end. But this ending the Afghan war is correct. And like having to constantly battle against these reporters who are like, will you just please send one more drone strike? I mean, fuck, it is aggravating.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, right?
But
I think
not a good look.
I think we agree that Biden does not have total control of what happens on the ground in Afghanistan subsequent to a withdrawal. But I think we would also agree that Biden can control messaging and how he evokes certain discourse around the withdrawal to mainstream media. And what I'm saying is that understanding that this gives off the perception of weakness. I didn't say it is a sign of weakness. Yep. I'm saying the perception. It would be logical that him and his media team were prepared with a strong rebuttal that exuded a certain type of strength and a certain type of command of the situation in order to neutralize the criticism for the way it was handled.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I
mean, it's Joe Biden still buys into the same America is the indispensable nation and American withdrawal is a tragedy, our nation built. If you look at the discourse, there's a friend of mine on Twitter actually made a good point about this. He said, look, whenever America fails in a project, they just go back to blaming the people who they did the project on. It's like, oh, well, the Afghans were never a unified nation. They just didn't deserve what we were giving.
The men didn't want to fight for their country.
Yeah, the Iraqis were the same. The Libyans were the same. So, this kind of like, wash your hands. We tried. We gave you all the opportunities, and you failed. So it's a sad loss. So he still buys into that kind of imperial narrative, and this is a big blow. It's like you said, it's a redeployment of imperial power of the United States to places where it is seen as more important. And yes, the media strategy was weak because I think Biden was conflicted probably about this stuff. But I would also say the hysteria on the right about the 25th Amendment, the hysteria about impeaching Biden, this has nothing to do with this Afghan withdrawal. If it wasn't for the Afghan withdrawal, it'd be something else. Because as soon as the Democrats started, whatever the Democrats have done to Trump, the Republicans are going to just roll down and like do the old Aikido stuff and do it on the. You could have the most competent president, and they would be doing this. Just look at Obama, right? Obama was the most milquetoast, the most obsequious to white America black president. He was not like Michael Brooks's old character, if you remember that.
Oh
Nation of Islam Obama, right? But they
I just want to kill the white man.
Just want to kill the white man.
Yeah.
Some Sunnis sometimes kill Shias, and Shias sometimes kill Sunnis. But we can all get together again and believe in one thing: we all need more suicide bombing.
It's like when he was like,
yeah, but this was, but like how Obama was the most like centrist, frankly conservative president. His discourse towards Black America was basically just Bill Cosby, and he was always talking about like no blue America, no. But yet they portrayed him as this hard left revolutionary who was implementing like a stealth socialist agenda in the United States. So are you surprised that these guys will be like saying anything to delegitimize Joe Biden, whether we agree with them or not? This was an inevitability because Republican attacks and discourse, A, they have no shame. They can change their position overnight. And B, they will use any ideological weapon, any discourse which they think resonates to attack their political opponents, whether it is based on reality or not. And that is something and that's what liberals fail to understand, is they're always trying to respond to specific accusations of these conservative media heads, when in fact it's all just a gish gallop tactic to like throw so many accusations at Joe Biden that they force the liberals on the defensive.
Well, yeah, but part of the problem here is that it's not simply the reactionary right that's making the criticism of Biden's actions. He's getting this from liberals on their own media networks as well.
Yeah, and it's even worse. I mean,
they're not calling for him to be impeached. That's a difference there.
Well, and like that's like that even like them not being a lockstep gives a whole lot of like credence to the Republicans. You know, they'll take everything they can use. But also too is like you had who was it, Seth Moulton, and then there was another Republican dude. Seth Moulton is Democrat from Massachusetts. He did challenge Nancy Pelosi for speaker, I think 4 years ago. And very, blue dog Democrat, and he's a veteran. Him and a Republican snuck to Afghanistan. It was like maybe 4 or 5 days ago. It was actually the day before the suicide attacks. But either way, right? They go there, they start talking about how this is a disaster and all these things like that. So it's like even the establishment Democrats and some of these third way fucking Democrats are really helping the Republicans, hit Biden with this. When at the end of the day, I think what is just true is that this is the cap on 40 years of failed foreign policy and hundreds of people, to include the service members that all the Americans that are going to weep for this July 4th. They are just the latest victims in this. And this is where too, it's like the administration can actually lay out some truth to give themselves a little bit of cover on the whole disaster.
I had a friend of mine who actually was suggesting that the U.S. Transfer of power to the Taliban was related to the fact that the U.S. wanted to use the Taliban as a military bulwark against Iran in the region. Gene, do you think there's any possible validity to that, or that might be a speculation?
Okay, so there is a lot of history of bad blood, and people forget this. Okay, people forget the 90s and the prehistory of the Taliban. The Taliban were never like portrayed as the good guys, but there was a lot of tension between Iran and the Taliban. And of course, Iran even cooperated with the United States in the war against Afghanistan. I used to watch Iranian state television in the late 1990s, and they would always refer to the Northern Alliance as the Islamic government of Afghanistan. Because what people don't quite remember is that the Taliban aren't exactly the same as the Mujahideen. The Taliban come out of the Mujahideen, but they're like a second generation formed in the camps of Pakistan with the support of, indirectly of the United States through ISI, the Pakistani intelligence service. The original Mujahideen formations had overthrown the government in 1992. They were ousted in 1996 and pushed the Taliban sort of assumed control of most of the country. And there was a lot of talk about driving pipelines through Afghanistan precisely to avoid Iran and to exclude Iran. Now, it is entirely possible that some American strategic planners out there are saying, well, we've lost to the Taliban, but hey, let's, we've got lemons, let's make lemonade. Maybe we can make a deal with the Taliban and they can be a bulwark against Iran. I don't think America planned to lose the war in Afghanistan and have the guys that they've been fighting for 20 years to take over. I think they thought that they could at least keep their government in for a little bit longer, and perhaps that government, even if it didn't control the whole country, could control most of the country and be like the official vehicle through which they could do relations. In a post, there were a lot of different ways. The Taliban, they're still, a hardcore, reactionary political movement, but they seem to have learned some lessons from the 1990s. They seem to be like, okay, we need to avoid international isolation. And, Iranian news at the moment is not super hostile to the Taliban, interestingly enough, even though historically there are many Afghans who fled the Taliban who live in Iran today. And in fact, there's a lot of cultural linkages between Afghanistan. This group, ISIS-K, that people are talking about, the K stands for Khorasan. And Khorasan is a broad Persian-speaking sort of, Khorasan is a province in Iran, but it has a broader meaning, which includes Tajikistan, parts of Central Asia, parts of Afghanistan. So it's important cultural linkages in terms of language and things like that. So there's a lot of ways this could go, but I would probably, unless you have some evidence that this is the thing, I think at best there might be some U.S. planners out there who are saying that maybe anti-Iranianism could be the basis for a rapprochement with the Taliban. But it depends what China does. China has its security concerns. I don't think the Taliban are going to try and mess with China and promote radical Islamism in China. That would be suicide for them. So we're going to see. I think my take would probably be that the Taliban are going to try and, at least to a certain degree, make nice with some big international players. And maybe even in a couple of years, they'll make nice with the United States, at least on the down low. But who knows?
I feel like that the making nice with the United States on the down low might happen a lot faster. And I think it has more to do with how Biden's going to have to fucking save this. Because that's part of, so the U.S. has already been working with the Taliban to do airstrikes against ISIS-K. They're released today saying, "Oh, hey, we got a drone. We killed the planners of the suicide bomb." Who I want. I just have to wonder, who were you working with to get the targeting information? The United States government, was it the Taliban? And I just I would assume that there might be a down low help for just some of the things that they need to be able to say that, hey, Americans that are there after the 31st can still leave. That's kind of where I think that there might be some dealing with the United States sooner than later.
Who's going to have more sway over the Taliban in Afghanistan, the United States or Pakistan and the ISI?
I think Pakistan. I think Pakistan is going to have sway, and Pakistan plays this game, right? It plays a game of good relations with the United States and good relations with China. So I think ISI at the very best are going to be, are going to be acting as kind of mentors and mediators for them. I think, and we don't know what's going to happen, honestly, because it's also going to depend on how the Taliban act in terms of like, what kind of like regime they impose on the country, what kind of, if they go, the United States has been talking to the Taliban already, right?
Yeah.
ISI ISI has a long history of connections with the Taliban, and I just don't think the Taliban are like, they don't want to like provoke things, and they're not friends with groups like ISIS. They have theological differences with groups like ISIS, like important theological differences. People don't take those seriously, but Pascal, I'm sure you'll be aware there's a big difference between people who reject all jurisprudence in the Islamic world and people who like accept jurisprudence, and there's like these different Islamic trends. And although to Westerners they're like, oh, what's the difference between the Taliban and ISIS? They're both like reactionary Islamic movements. On a theological level, on a level of jurisprudence, there are big differences. And number two, they're political rivals, right? So cooperation against a group like ISIS or Al Qaeda could perfectly be in place because the Taliban don't want to have to share power with ISIS Khorasan, which has pretensions to taking over the country as well. So there's a lot of open questions. I don't think the Taliban are going to do some crazy stuff like export jihad to Xinjiang in Turkey, in China.
What about the capacity of China coming in, filling in the void, and becoming the infrastructure development partner with the Taliban, laying down roads, building hospitals, treating doctors, et cetera, et cetera?
Totally doable. The Chinese probably don't. I mean, I believe, and I may be wrong about this, I believe the Chinese already did send some troops into Afghan territory, in this strip of territory which is along the Chinese border. There's a kind of like a strip of territory at the top, in the top corner. I forget the name of it, but I think that the Chinese don't, I think it's perfectly possible that the Chinese could do something in Afghanistan big time. They could integrate Afghanistan into Belt and Road, right? And that's going to have a big impact because China's big local rival is India. And India is becoming more and more politically isolated in the region through the Belt and Road Initiative. So I'm not an expert on the geopolitics of the region, but there is certainly a very strong economic and geopolitical argument for the Chinese to engage in some kind of reconstruction and cooperation with the Taliban, especially if by doing so, they are containing any potential threat to their own territorial integrity, which is presented by Islamic separatist movements in Xinjiang and places like that. So, this is a good way of protecting their borders and also containing a potential enemy and also, expanding their infrastructural project.
I think, I don't know. I mean, like, I think that is something that, like, I feel like the Chinese are putting the diplomatic groundwork for. I do have to wonder though if like they're waiting to see how stable is Afghanistan before they actually start really putting their resources forward, because if it's just going to end up as a target between the civil war or like if you want to call it that with like ISIS-K and everything like that, they're not going to fucking sink money into a lost cause.
By the way, that strip of territory is called the Wakhan Corridor. That strip of territory, just so people know.
Well, I mean, just before we pivot to the next subject, just so you guys didn't know, in July of 2021, this year, there was a meeting between Chinese authorities and the Taliban discussing what happens next after U.S. withdrawal.
Yeah, and like someone in the chat mentioned like the lithium rights and everything like that, which I think it's like one thing for like to have like a mining company set up, And then it's a whole other thing to have like these either long long logistical lines, whether it be, rail line, pipeline, or some type of port that's going to be exposed to, any type of danger.
I mean, the reason Afghanistan, I think the idea that Afghanistan was a resource war rather than a war to extract money from the US population with the Afghans as collateral damage, is that the price of extracting the resources from Afghanistan, for the United States at the very least, are just not worth it. But it's right on China's border, and China has this huge capacity of construction, which they've done impressive construction projects in the Himalayan mountains. It's totally possible that they could do something in Afghanistan, and it could be economically feasible to extract Afghanistan's resources. I mean, but like people don't realize that extracting resources is extremely expensive and needs a lot of pre-existing infrastructure. I'll give you an example. When I was in Kurdistan, there was a lot of they have very high quality marble there, right? Very expensive, high quality marble, and there was a bunch of Greek companies that came over to look at it. And the point, at the end of the day, the point came out that, this is great, high quality marble, but at the end of the day, it's just not worth bringing out because you would need to have a railway connection and all these kind of things. And there isn't the infrastructural capacity to make it economically worthwhile. But China is a construction country. And so they could possibly...
They can make it worthwhile.
They could make it worthwhile. Yeah.
Well, let us pivot, gentlemen, to the next subject. California recall.
Are you ready for the video?
Oh, G's got a video. Make it happen.
The best producer in town.
My dad said, "What time do you open?" She said, 8:30. "What time do you close?" She said, 5:30. My dad said, "I'll be here at 8:30. I'll be here till 5:30 till you have something." Sat in that chair for almost a day and a half. Lady calls him up, says, "I have something. You probably don't want it." My dad said, "I'm sure I'm going to want it. What is it?" She said, "It's a job with Nabisco brand breads cleaning toilets." My dad took that job for 10 years, took a second job with another bread company cleaning toilets called Barbara Ann Bread, cooked for a family on the weekends, and went to night school 2 or 3 nights a week to get his GED. The man never slept, Peter. That's why he was so cranky. You come home to a house full of 3 rambunctious boys with no sleep. See how you feel. So this conversation took 8 hours. And as we were talking, my dad got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I got smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally, I'm crying. And I said, "Dad, I am so sorry." And he said, "Larry, don't be. You didn't know. But follow the advice I've given you and your brothers. Hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you bitch, moan, and whine about what somebody did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror and say to yourself, what could I have done to change the outcome?" And finally, Larry, no matter how good you are, how hard you work, how ethical you are, bad things will happen. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mom and me whether or not we raised a man. Lady said, "I have none."
Dependent on your son to pull the family through.
There he is, the new future governor of California.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, Larry Elders.
I wonder how many government contracts through Republicans Larry Elder has gotten throughout his life to do media appearances, to do various kind of work. And, by the way, there's a question now about this quote unquote charity that he's had for some odd 20 years. People are wondering, you've had this charity, it raised maybe $20,000. You didn't have any more. Well, what have you done with the money? But the question becomes, though, is that what is this recall in California? Is this an indictment of the notion of liberal Democrats' ability to govern that state? Or is this really about people being pissed off because of COVID? Is it the problem with the unhoused, homelessness? Anyone have any thoughts on what is really driving the dislike of a Gavin Newsom?
I think honestly, it just might be a combination of all of those things, plus the large, just the size and population of California, which is like, ideologically diverse populations in California, because it's not even that you have, oh, hey, you know, like, oh, there's some libertarians here or scattered about, or, you know, there's some really, you know, devout Republicans there, whatever. California's got so many people. You've got huge amounts of those, whatever, right? All the variations. And it's, you know, you're basically able to form a coalition of, we don't like that, you know, but they all disagree on where they want to go. And that's where, with the governor, you know, like with the recall within California, you know, this happened, what, 2003, 2002. And that's how Arnold Schwarzenegger got elected. Basically, the majority of California could agree, hey, we don't like Gray Davis, but most of them didn't actually agree that they wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to be governor. But hey, with the recall and where it goes, that's just how it happens. Some of the things that are worrisome is, because of that, it's easy to not like one governor. They can shit can him. Larry Elder, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, is going to have his name at the top of the ballot. And I mean, yeah, so I would say it's okay to be a little bit nervous.
Well, what is also interesting, though, right, and Jason always makes this clear, is that people are always acting like, oh my God, what does this mean? California is going to go red. One student of history, remember, California is the state that Ronald Reagan was governor of before he eventually became president. We also had a Republican governor, as Jason has mentioned, of California within a generation, which was Arnold Schwarzenegger. So it's not as if California has been, you know, deep blue, liberal deep blue in terms of its governance throughout all of the modern, you know, history of American society.
Nope.
There are parts of California, i.e. Orange County, hardcore conservative area. So I kind of push back against this notion people have that all of California is this kind of like, you know, liberal kind of
Hippie, that's like, and I mean, I grew up thinking California was just like literally full of like all these hippies and stuff like that. But like you said, Orange County, deeply conservative. You like North California is you got like some very Republican pockets. You go to like Silicon Valley, right? Do you think like
the tech libertarians
is the birthplace of this fucking gig economy, oppressive fucking bullshit? Is that's the liberal bastion, or like, you know, like it doesn't? It's just. Yeah, it's a false narrative. Really, it's a fucking just false narrative.
And you know what's interesting though, right? Is that, you know, someone brings up a very good point. Is that if the Republicans are able to capture this state, what does it mean, particularly for the 2024 presidential election? What does it mean for the balance of power in Congress? We have people like I believe Dianne Feinstein needs to get replaced. Someone's going to be, I don't know how the California system works, but it might be that the governor will be the one who chooses her senatorial replacement. What exactly are the long-term ramifications? Janice Graham is saying Larry Elder is a sociopathic, narcissistic in the form of Trump, unlike the sicko Ronald Reagan, vanilla-flavored sicko. It was Nancy, his alter ego narcissist. Well, you know, we're definitely not fans of Larry Elder here, without a doubt. But the larger question that becomes for me is that if Elder is able to capture the gubernatorial seat, what are the long-term strategic ramifications that this means for national electoral politics, the direction of the Senate, House seats? You know, Marcus, fill us in here.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think I don't think it has much damage on federal, you know, those federal statewide elections. But we do have to like realize like what has those federal elections produced in California. You know, yes, we've got the one person that voted against the Afghan war, Barbara Lee, who's been kind of like one of the more left, especially in the House for, quite some time except for, recent history. That doesn't, some of these things aren't going to shift, but at the end of the day, these statewide elections that are going across, across California, at the end of the day, you would either end up, with a Dianne Feinstein. I can't remember the new guy, but he was the former DA, and then stepped in. And I mean, Kamala Harris was the senator before. So this, I don't think whether, I think there is a real chance that Larry Elder could be to run the show, but at the end of the day, California is still going to end up with some solidly just not good, just absolute milquetoast neolib, no matter what, when it comes to statewide elections.
Oh, we're talking about an economy that's the 7th biggest in the world. We have major industries in the state, agriculture as well. I mean, I don't think that it is insignificant that California would go in the way of not only just, a milquetoast regular Republican, but someone who is just an absolute ridiculous reactionary crypto fascist like a Larry Elder. I think that would definitely be kind of a blow to the psyche of the centrist Democrats that we have on the congressional level throughout the country, for sure.
And I think that's where too is that's where the big difference is between Larry Elder and Arnold Schwarzenegger, as far as the ramifications of the Democrats losing this. The thing is that's really fucked up is that the Democrats are doing exactly the same tactic that they did when they lost to Arnold Schwarzenegger. So great, let's see how this fucking goes. Just only because they're not willing to cut ties with someone who's incredibly unpopular, no matter how unpopular they are, no matter what the ramifications. And Kamala Harris being chosen for VP is another example of that. But I think there is a big difference between the process in which a recall election gets called and voted on that does make up the difference between a normal Senate statewide election.
I would also add to that. I think this tells us about the difference in sort of political strategy and thought between Republicans and Democrats, in the sense that it's almost as if Democrats, when they are trying to maintain power, they're trying to maintain power with the team that they have, so that they're loyal to their team. It's perhaps even speaks to them as individuals as being decent people in a certain way, that they're okay, these are our guys, for better or for worse, as long as they're not too progressive, we will stick with our team, we will back our team to the end. Whereas Republicans seem more willing to think about advancing an agenda, not through a particular cohort of politicians, but through maintaining institutional control. So if they need to dump a politician or they need to cut ties to a politician, it's no big deal, because the objective is not maintaining the particular cohort of friends that they have, but maintaining a majority to execute power. And the Democrats, again, show their fecklessness and their delusions and their slavery to kind of liberal, we're the adults in the room ideology, by their inability to make a hard political decision that is needed to consolidate power. We see this at a national level. It would be very easy for the Democrats, with minimal effort, to consolidate power at a national level through passing voting rights legislation, through giving people, handing out money, doing totally cynical things to secure their base. But because of the absolute subservience to this notion that they are like responsible adults to some sort of, as if there's some metaphysical judge of who's an adult in the room, leaves them unable to, do the things necessary to maintain power. But with the specifics of California, I would say this might be disastrous in the long term, or it might just be the Doug Jones moment for the Democrats. If you remember, Alabama voted for a Democrat. It was a blip that was very specific circumstances.
Yes, yeah.
So,
over a pedophile. Barely won over a pedophile. That's...
Yeah.
I mean,
we will be pivoting now. Voting rights, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Gene has a video.
Some of you have heard me say that the right to vote is precious, almost sacred. Many people marched and protested for the right to vote. Some gave a little blood, and others lost their lives. In my hearts of hearts, I believe that we should make it simple and convenient for all of our citizens to be part of the democratic process. It should not matter whether you're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. We should be able to participate in the democratic process. Today, our democracy is under attack. We can do better, and we must do better. We have a moral obligation, a mission, and a mandate to empower all of the American people, not just a select few. We must do what is right, what is fair, and what is just.
Yeah, I wonder if John Lewis felt about doing what was right, fair, and just when he supported the rise of the DLC in the 80s that took the Democratic Party in the direction that threw black people under the bus and poor people under the bus and gave birth to the Clintons. Not a fan. Neither was my mentor, Bruce Dixon, of John Lewis. But
neither was Dhoruba bin Wahab. I remember
no,
that.
Dhoruba bin Wahab was not a fan. Dhoruba bin Wahab was making the argument. He's like, why are we fighting fights that we won already all over again? And I was like, ooh, shots fired.
But the John Lewis Voting Act has been passed. So I wonder what you guys think about that. It's been passed in the House, but it's going to go to the Senate now. So what's the deal?
So I think important note, right? It's passed the House. We will see. We will see. And this is something that has been signaled since day one. When even before Joe Biden was inaugurated, the legislature gets kicked up, and there's just this obvious fucking block called a filibuster, where requiring the Senate to have 60 votes to pass like anything. So, will there be 10 Republicans to vote for this John Lewis Voting Rights Act? I would say, audience, please do not hold your breath, because you will fucking kill yourself. This, without the filibuster moving, none of this shit is going anywhere. In a lot of cases, too, the Democrats, especially when it comes to the gerrymandering and the way the districts are being drawn up, they fucking failed. They failed to do the things necessary for them to hold the very sliver of power that they already have, which is something I've said 100 times before. I'm gonna say it again. It was. In this country, is it easy to vote? No. But during COVID, it was one of the easiest times it has been to vote in the United States. And with that, plus Trump and his bad response to COVID, Joe Biden still barely fucking won, right? And hey, not necessarily in the overall count, but because of the Electoral College, just barely won. The Democrats are just absolutely fucked. And I don't know what else to say.
It's because and I have to say, some people view this as a conspiracy, the Republicans and Democrats are in cahoots to pull things right. And there are absolute venal and corrupt Democratic politicians who are obsessed with bipartisanship. But I think the bigger problem the Democrats have is their sort of ideological outlook, which leaves them completely unable to cope with a political situation where you have one political party that is not only aggressively seeking power, is also seeking to fix the systems through legal mechanisms to ensure that they can maintain minoritarian rule over the country. And the American political system, which is not particularly democratic, is very susceptible to this kind of manipulation. Like with a presidential election in a normal country, it is very hard to rig a presidential election, because you have a popular vote. Sometimes you even have a runoff, so somebody has to get 50% or more. In the United States, you just need to strategically win in a couple of states, and then you can take the whole country hook, line, and sinker. And Americans think this is an entirely normal thing, but it isn't. It's a bizarre, antiquated political system, which is susceptible to manipulation, susceptible to corruption, and extremely vulnerable. So whatever democracy exists in the United States, and I think we're hard on the United States, but there are important sort of aspects of popular participation and sort of popular rights that Americans have. These will be restricted more and more as the minoritarian party seeks to consolidate power, where in a situation where the Democrats, which are a loose coalition of political forces that vary, one of the reasons the Democrats can't be as disciplined as the Republicans is because they're far more heterodox, ideologically speaking, ranging from what you would call a conservative, like a right-wing liberal, to borderline social Democrats. And American politics, I will end on this point before Marcus jumps in. American politics forces you, if you engage in any electoral politics, if you care about electoral politics, and I'm not saying everybody should care about electoral politics, but if you do, it forces you to silo in to either being a Republican or a Democrat, or a functional Republican or a functional Democrat. And that is the bind, I think, that we have at the moment, and the Democrats are doing a pretty crappy job. Sorry, Marcus.
Well, no, I just want to even highlight one of those things of just the inability, unwillingness for the Democratic Party to engage in a necessary culture war to push their own narrative. Because part of the reasons why there is not a solid ideological strain behind the politics of the Democratic Party is because they don't there's not one developed and then pushed out to the people.
But there's a material basis to that as well. Sorry, Pascal. Go ahead.
Well, I think that there is a certain ideological cohesion that exists within the Democratic Party, and it revolves around crushing the progressives that exist in their left flank. That's one thing that they do very well. The Democrats are very good at making sure progressive policy does not get popularized in their party. They have no problem doing that.
Yeah, but I would say though that is about 2 to 3% of the amount of work overall of the party. Because that's the thing, what you're describing of them being what they're very fucking good at, it's reflex. That is a reflex for especially DNC established Democrats. It's hitting the knee, just bam. So the other project, the other work that the party does is just this spinning their fucking wheels in this, I don't know, that's ideological bullshit.
But it's not just that. I think the Democratic Party has a lot, as an institution, Pascal, is less coherent. I agree. The leadership faction of the Democratic Party are the centrist Democrats who control the top levers of political power in the party. Are fixated on crushing the political left. But let's also forget what they're doing is crushing a faction within their own party, right? They're attacking other Democrats. And the Democratic base is kind of incoherent because, you talk to a lot of Democratic voters, people who are registered Democrats. It comes down to the question of what is a Democrat, right? The American political parties, especially the Democratic Party, is not like a European political party where you have an active membership, where you sign up and you pay, and there's internal democratic mechanisms and things like that. The Democratic Party is almost as an arm of the state in a very clear way, in that it controls the access to the ballot. And the Democrats in particular have a multiplicity of political forces pulling on them. Obviously, I think the material reason for this is the predominance of big donor money. But I think the Democratic Party is highly factionalized, and that factionalization means that it's difficult to consolidate, because the centrists will not consolidate behind a left-wing political candidate, and they base the progressive wing is always torn between a kind of rejectionist politics, which in effect allows the Republicans to come to power and pull politics to the right, or rallying behind the centrist Democrats, which again pulls the politics to the right. So we're, because the progressive wing, the left wing of politics in America is so weak, we're in a totally screwed situation.
Well, does this not beg the question that the notion of progressives, quote unquote, taking over the Democratic Party or making the Democratic Party the ultimate manifestation of their progressive politics is rather fruitless? It will only be fruitless.
Yeah, well, I was like, even like the notion of like that happening now is, like absurd, and like I think, yeah, you'd have to like literally pull out the heads. And I think you look at like the Nevada Democratic Party, where people tried to do hey, they went the route, got the support, got voted into power in the party, and all of the establishment Democrats took their ball and went home and like literally emptied out the coffers, released all the crew, all that stuff.
Well, we got to read the super chat. We just got a major super chat here. Thank you for bringing us together, Pascal 2024. Haha, that's very funny.
Let's do it.
Andrew, thank you so much for that Massivo super chatto. That was very good. Thank you so much.
Who would you be your VP, Pascal?
Jason, man, he's got the music.
Yeah. Would you let Cuba back in the country?
Depends, maybe. If you brought Summer, I would. She's cool. She's a moderating factor.
Okay, there we go.
But something that like I do like want to hit on is like that. I guess like just to make it clear of like the absolute waste of time, right? The project for the Democratic Party and what are they working towards? They have put, I think, about $25 million into a get out to vote strategy, right? And like completely ignoring that the bills that are actually going to help them win, so they'd have to do a lot less work as far like it would just be easier, people would be easier to vote. But that's what their plan is, right? That's what the work that they're doing. And like, yeah, the leadership, like they can go on CNN and MSNBC and swat the left at any point in time. That's like one of their easier things. But the thing that's absolute insanity with the model of the Democratic Party is that on a national stage, doing the work to make it necessary for them to win is a second thought. And then they're just going to take a bunch of donor money and throw it at these get out to vote things, in which case I guess Stacey Abrams is going to just try and yes queen herself into a Democratic victory, but they're fooling themselves.
I like that Stacey Abrams is going to yes queen herself into a Democratic victory.
I will say
Mark is throwing shots, ladies and gentlemen. Mark is throwing shots.
This is what they're doing. This is all they got.
They do love their Yas Queen.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say this, look, I'm not going to pretend that I know what an appropriate strategy is, especially because I'm not an American. I live here, I observe things. I have to be subject to the laws of the great state of Missouri.
You don't like it, then leave.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's actually literally the slogan of the Turkish Fascist Party, Ya Sev Ya Terk Et. But this whole thing about the Democratic Party and taking over the Democratic Party strategy or what have you, it's a real strategic bind for the left if we're going to talk about electoral politics, right? Now, Pascal's sort of meta point, which is always about building power, and that being power that is literally built in like working class neighborhoods, going out, talking, building networks and things like that. I think that is a very important primary function for a fundamental institution institutional undergirding of any left politics has to be built in that way. When Vivek came on our show the other day, one of the things points he made was that the left does not have any linkages with the working class today, and it's entirely a sort of intellectual petit bourgeois phenomenon. But when it comes to electoral politics, I'm always in the bind of because of the nature of the American political system, which we have no power to change at the moment. We can't get a constitutional convention to change things. We can't make an amendment. So we have to play, if you're playing the electoral game, you have to play on the field that it exists as it is now. I don't see any other option from doing it as through a vehicle of the Democratic Party. And that is problematic because, of course, maybe down the line, you could have a dirty break. You could break from the Democratic Party and things like that. But because the left is so weak at the moment, what is the other option? As I said at the beginning, and you see this with everybody, you either are not interested in electoral politics and don't talk about it, or you're a functional Republican or a functional Democrat. You look at someone like Glenn Greenwald, who does a lot of good journalism, but today he's kind of functionally a Republican because that's where he's directing his political ire. If you look at a lot of the left media people who are critical of the Democratic Party, the critique that they're functionally Democrats is not entirely an unfair critique. The question is, do we have to be functionally Democrats at this stage if we do any electoral politics? Where can we do electoral politics outside of the brand of the Democratic Party? Where is it a functional necessity to do it within the Democratic Party? And we need to have real strategic conversations about this rather than hysterical whining about, I don't want to be a Democrat. I hate Democrats.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. No, Gene. Yes. Like
a big panty conversation.
Yes.
Okay. Like running for city council in Chicago, let's do it on a DSA ticket. Let's build independent power. Let's build a brand. Let's do this thing. Running for Congress, let's do it. Run as Democrats. Let's try and take over the apparatus of state parties and do like this. Pursue those multiple strategies. What I see on left media is that people are emotionally hostile to the Democratic Party, as if the Democratic Party is some kind of metaphysical force in history and not an organizational structure which may or may not be useful within a particular political context. So that's the problem I have. Yeah, I freaking don't like Democrats, right? I don't like Republicans, but we have to wage a two-front war. You can't wage war against the neoliberals all the time, and you can't wage war against the Republicans all the time. You have to strike out a third path, and that needs strategic thinking. That may not be what gets clicks. It may not be what is emotionally satisfying when you see an absolute jackass like Kirsten Sinema or Dianne Feinstein or Joe Manchin messing around in the things. You may not like them, and I don't have a problem with saying there's some Democrats we should let them lose as a strategic move. But I think we have to have a very nuanced approach because of the political infrastructure of electoral politics that we're engaging with. Otherwise, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But then don't go on about crying about electoral politics all the time.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, and to the point of driving stuff for clicks, that they just ask of where by the end of the fucking video, what are you left with? Angry feelings, or information and or a plan to do something about whatever you're complaining about. And so I agree with you 100%. I think that people need to, especially the left, a better and strategic way is to understand that yes, within federalism, there's different levels, different access, different requirements for access to different officials, different jobs and just becoming an elected official, right? So we've talked about with Angela Walker about her run for local sheriff. There's all these type of local DAs and all these things like that that's actually gotten some wins on the left. Even taking up the Chicago and their legislature, or that they're there was Kenzo, correct? You hook me up with the amount of number that the DSA have got. New York City, same thing. Kashama Sawant in Seattle. That's another local level where you got to have where you actually have someone separate of the Democratic Party. But people do need to understand at the federal level, you have to give some concessions just because of the reality of where we're at. You're not going to get a socialist winning a whole district for the House or a whole state. That's not going to happen right now. But how do you get the conditions and where that can happen? And I think it would be, very good just to also realize that if there is a takeover of the Democratic Party like they did in Nevada, the left has to understand and actually build a separate party apparatus, because even if we are able to take over, then they're going to just completely cut and run, in which case we are going to have to be able to run the party in how we see fit, which would be, a whole lot different than the Democratic Party. So, Gene, I am 100% with you. I think that if people are serious about actually building the left, you'd have to understand that, hey, is a socialist getting elected on the federal level possible in the U.S.? Yes. Is it something that's going to happen in the next 2 years or 4 years? Fuck no. And you'd be silly to think so. And the people who are getting upset that it's not happening have no semblance of what's actually happening. Because that's the thing is, I went like last week to the Discourse strike here in Richmond because me and Dick, we had some fucking extra time. And you think that there's any super online lefties out there talking about socialism and communism with the people who are striking? No. Do the people, the workers, have any real semblance of what socialism is at all? No. Were they just appreciative of some random fucking dudes actually showing some solidarity? And are those the type of relationships that are actually going to get inroads? Because hey, you don't just say, oh, there were this, but by the end we start talking, and then we actually start giving about why we are here in our ideology, and they're starting to see oh, okay, maybe they're not so bad. But the idea that we just can't ever do a democratic thing. What's the other, literally, like we were saying, our other options are non-existent. And we need to build those other options while we're trying to fight that two-scale war.
On that note, Marcus firing shots, sending it out. Marcus moves to Virginia and he gets all kinds of spicy, man. I'm telling you.
It's just, I don't know.
I'm Pascal. I mean, because what are your thoughts on this kind of stuff?
I think we need to organize movements. I'm a movement guy. I think that regardless of whether it's Democrats or Republicans, the only option is to mobilize and organize working class people to determine the politics that they want to put pressure on the state and the ruling class to get. And listen, I do believe in the inside-outside game. I'm not one of those people who says that we shouldn't have people running for our electoral positions, but my position has always been, and I say that again to the current AOC, the squad, or whatever, the best we can expect from having quote-unquote members of our coterie in Congress and elected office is that they will at least give us an audience when we're banging on the door.
Yes.
That's the most that I can expect for them. And I don't have much higher expectation for them than I have for the normal Democrats, because my overall philosophy on electoral politics stems from my analysis of what is the purpose of government in an American capitalist system. In an American capitalist system, the purpose of government is to protect the interests of capital, not reflect the needs of the American populace. If I realize that the purpose of government is to protect the interests of capital, whether they admit it or not, then I realize that the government is pretty much a tool of the enemy of the people and must be forced into positions of concession or reform to address the needs of the populace, which it is normally working against. That might seem kind of either radical or illogical to some, but show me a time in American political history when the American government has not been rooted in protecting the interests of capital.
No, I think you're 100% right, and this is why I said if there's a serious left that's trying to take over political power, thinking of the Democratic Party as a host to take over in some cases, I think is 100% a good idea. But like I said, it's you're going to have to understand and build out the party structure outside of the Democratic Party, because even if you are successful in taking out because of the point that Pascal just made, their job is to protect capital, and they will take that capital and they will fucking run. And so that you need to be left with the independent structure that actually works for the people. And I think also too that when I say party, and Gene even made the distinction earlier of like the Democratic Party used to, or at some, I would say used, at some points operated as an outreach and, resource tool for people, and this but this is something that has completely fucking gone away. And as the left, if you're worried about material conditions, this is something that's going to have to build in to the overall party apparatus, right? So it's not an electoral politics thing. It's if we want to deliver housing for people, how do we do that most effectively and efficiently? And some of it is convincing construction workers to build shit, but also others it is actually trying to make inroads on some of these laws that prevent housing, prevent HUD from even building low income housing. There are other things that we can make it easier for people to actually achieve those material conditions. And the thing with the American populace, the ones who are even engaged a little bit in politics, it is through electoral politics, right? Anything that has to do with policy, their connection point is through electoral politics. So at the very least, we're going to have to know what the fuck we're talking about with the major players in order to reach these people and try and bring them over to our side.
I'm not opposed to focusing or using electoral politics. What I'm saying is that based on my premise that the function of the state is to protect the interests of capital, realize that having those elected officials and not having the mechanism of social bodies in people, of human beings, in an organized capacity to put pressure on the elected officials to make demands is basically surrendering your most effective tools, which to me are the movement capacity or the organized capacity of citizens to try to push the agenda of elected officials.
And I agree. I think, and even like when I even talking about this, like the party aspect, even at its fullest fulcrum, it is a assistance to the people-led movement, right? It is supposed to be the arm, not the brain, right?
I think an important thing to state here is, I agree with Pascal. One of the primary things that needs to be done is to build an infrastructure of power outside of the Democratic Party and outside of parliamentary politics, one which can exercise influence on that field. And I think one of the risks about, to go to the other side of the argument with the people who say, let's just do politics through the Democratic Party, let's do progressive politics through the Democratic Party. Without an outside political movement, you cannot discipline a faction within the Democratic Party to follow your political line. At present, if AOC, Cory Bush, all these people, if they wanted to sell out to the Democratic Party and toe the line and, become, rise up in leadership positions and become Yas Queens and things like that, they could totally do that because there's no political organization that can hold them to account. Right? The fact that they remain posturing to the political left is purely a kind of individual choice, not one which has a structural support to it. So I think it's extremely important that we build a kind of base that we can discipline our people. And my point about not being emotional about the Democratic Party is I don't have any attachment to the Democratic Party or not to the Democratic Party. It's just a vehicle, right?
Yeah.
If you were in a circumstance where the vehicle was the Republican Party, then use the Republican Party. If you're in rural Missouri and you think, oh, I can actually do something if I run on a Republican ticket because of X, Y, and Z, do it. I don't really care. It's just another t-shirt. The important thing is to build that movement that can discipline those people who go into politics. Kuba always talks about the importance of building cadre, and I think building cadre is important. But I think one of the other things is that you have to also be able to discipline your cadre so that they don't get co-opted, because the forces that will pull you towards co-optation are extremely powerful.
No doubt.
And I'd ask you a question, because there's something that I thought about, as you know, and like I know we talk about like electoral politics and shit. What would you think of like just an overall strategy, especially as like, and I think this might be good federal level, as a way to start out, is like, of like, yes, you go like someone running in the Democratic Party trying to unseat through a primary, and then literally stating, hey, unless that, you know, whoever wins the primary says, you know, they're for X, Y, and Z policy, I will then run third party in order to give, you know, to attempt to give the people what they want. I think that's at very least the first step, as far as someone saying, yes, I'm going to use the Democratic Party, and then if you don't give these certain policy questions or policy concessions, no matter who it is, I'm going to jump outside and go a third run. I mean, do you think that would be, you know, at least like, I guess, an effective start?
I think that could be. I think that could be effective. I think that the progressive wing of politics has to be a little bit more no holds barred. Just as centrists play dirty, then, you know, like, you can just say, look, you want me to play dirty, we'll play dirty this way. If you don't want us to play dirty, make these concessions.
Yeah.
These are our minimum demands that you have to meet. If you do not, we will mess with you. But we can only mess with people if we have the infrastructure to mess with them.
Yeah.
You know, like a bunch of podcasters, you know, organizing a march, which nobody cares about, is not going to do anything, right? You need to actually get in and build support amongst working class people, and also take your lead from working class people in terms of what things should be foreground. You know, intellectuals, inverted commas, in the kind of like neutral sociological sense, have their function, right? You know, you have this like Gramscian concept of organic intellectuals and things like that. But at the end of the day, you know, most people are like pretty capable of understanding their own circumstances. You know, at best, intellectuals should be facilitators of learning, and not like, we don't need to be like just telling people what they need. They know what they need, right? Doesn't mean they have great politics, but, you know, you can push back and try and persuade people, like, maybe don't like have this kind of retrograde social posture on a particular issue of sexuality or gender and things like that. But beyond that, we have to be integrated into these communities, and we have to, like Vivek said, we have to stop turning left groups into therapy sessions, right?
There you go.
We have to
Because, and I'll say this. Yeah, like just even talking with like some of the people on strike for Nabisco, I talked to one of the heads of the union, so actually not one of the workers, and they're just like talking about the strike, how this came about, things that they need, resources that they could use, all that stuff like that. And I asked them, hey, is there any potential for this to, you know, bleed out to a larger movement? You know, have you ever, you know, been talks about a general strike to get some of these things that you need, healthcare, a living wage, all this for, you know, everyone in the United States? Looked at me like I had a fucking dick growing out of my forehead. Just like, general strike, what? You know? And like, and I was like, well, I guess just, can you talk about how what goes into starting up a strike and this, that, and whatever, right? I completely had to transition out of it, because like the guy had no idea what the hell I was talking about.
What that proves to you is that the echo chamber of discussion that we have as the left media sphere, or left quote unquote intellectuals, compared to what people who are actually working class folk who are trying to find a way to get better conditions for themselves, that there is a massive gap between those conversations, because somebody is not talking to somebody else.
Yep.
That's 100% true. 100% true. And I think there's a lot of politics of aesthetics that take place on the left. I always tell, when people ask me about my politics, I'm like, look, I'm kind of like functionally a social democrat, right? You know, I am open to like further left politics, you know, I'm open to like, you know, whatever. But at the moment in America, you know, you don't even have universal health care, right? You don't even have a functioning train system, right? It's, you know, like, and there's no functioning left. As Pascal always says, there is no left. There are just some leftists. One of the problems I think the left has is like, you have a lot of cosplaying. You have a lot of posturing and cosplaying. The left has been defeated. So we live in an era where people are nostalgic for a time where the left wing was powerful. That could be, cosplaying, late 1960s Black nationalist radicalism by adopting language and motifs from that era. It could be role-playing that you're like the Bolshevik Party in Russia, 1917, or Mao in 1949. I'm not criticizing, these movements, these historical movements per se, but I'm saying the retrograde and backwards-looking nature of some aspects of the left helps reinforce this echo chamber where, you just have people yelling at each other because you haven't read this, you haven't read that. It is the ultimate form of petty bourgeois narcissism until people actually, instead of sitting on their asses and like bloviating to one another, and like go out and like people criticize DSA, right? But DSA had a policy called like rank and file where they were like, okay, people should go and get jobs in like rank and file things. Like, people should do that, right? Go get a job, in a place where you can like organize and integrate with the people, do X, Y, and Z. But, a lot of this cosplaying on Twitter, it's like pseudo-politics. It's like who can be the most based. And it just becomes a politics of aesthetic. And frankly, the reality is we're all social democrats in America, right? Everybody rallied on the left, except for very few people on highly sectarian groups rallied behind Bernie either actually or at least in rhetoric, right? Which was rallying behind a social democratic program, whether they were like Joseph Stalin aesthetics, Mao aesthetics, or FDR was based aesthetics. They all rallied around that same political program.
Some of them did not. Some of them did not.
Yeah, but like who? Like a very small minority of the left. I said, yes, some sectarian groups, some identitarian groups, but the vast majority of the left functionally rallied around that political project. Yes, I can find people who did not rally around the Corbett project or rally around X, Y, and Z project. That's fine. I'm not saying everybody did. I'm talking about the biggest chunk of the left, including people who present themselves as revolutionaries, as well as those who present themselves as reformers. I mean, that's just the reality of things, right? Am I wrong? Maybe I'm wrong. I am not.
No, I mean, I think that's.
I would argue that the current iteration of the left largely came out of people who were in that coterie of Sanders supporters. I would say that, but being that I was writing in left spaces well before that group came to be, I know a lot of the people who had left politics, who were writing in left journals. When Sanders came around in 2016, they weren't down with that shit at all.
Yeah, I think
Chris Hedges admitted that he never supported Sanders.
Yeah, but
he's a major voice on the left.
Yes, but these are relatively marginal people. Like if you look at the base of support that Sanders built, like he was building it in, amongst Amazon and Walmart employees, right? And so, like I like Chris Hedges, no problem with him, and I know he didn't support Sanders, but like these were relatively marginal figures on the left that people look at as kind of curiosos, right?
I think even just like based off of like numbers for like DSA, like especially after these like the Sanders campaign, seeing like huge bumps, that there's I don't know. I think Gene, you're like largely right, and like especially at the very least for the people who supported Sanders on the left, I mean, functionally, yeah, I guess Demsock, right? Or you just like that's just where you're at. And that thing too is like, I don't know, like that's necessarily like it's not a hit. It's not like anything bad or good. It's just like reality, because we don't have any of the structures, institutions to put, our vote behind someone who's actually left.
We're in a bind. We're in a chicken and egg bind. That's what it is.
Well, I mean, if you read some of the recent publications that have come out of some major left voices, Adolph Reed, Paul Street, fascism is on the march. We're pretty much up against the wall. We should be talking about a popular front, a united front.
Well, this is it. Like, like this is actually really an interesting point. I think we need to focus on it. So the fascism is coming discourse is super interesting, because if we accept fascism is coming, Pascal, if we accept that characterization that this is fascism and it's coming, and I have views on the fascism debate that you probably know that I kind of think of stupid debate anyway. But if we're saying fascism is coming, then it is behooving to us. We should be rallying behind the Democratic Party in a popular front. That's what that's what we're saying, right? If we say the Republican Party is fascism, and will put us up against the wall, like either metaphorically or literally, and is going to shut down any possibility of future peaceful electoral change, then what is the political conclusion? I think some of the reticence to call Trumpism fascism amongst certain portions of the left was based on the fact that if we make that statement, we're basically saying that we have to rally behind the Democratic Party. Like, no matter what, you have to vote blue, no matter who, because fascism is coming. Because if you think that the Trump is Mussolini or Hitler, or some kind of American version of it,
why are we assuming that it has to be Mussolini or Hitler? Why can't it be Franco?
I mean, all right, Franco was pretty bad. Like it was pretty bad for Spanish people. Fucking Civil War, if you remember, they had a civil. So what I'm saying is I'm not disagreeing. I think there's strong arguments to say, talk about, this new reactionary right in fascist terms. There's some arguments to say that we should keep it distinct from the historical phenomenon of fascism. But we have to be, I think there's if we start saying that the fact is Adolf Reed in that new article he wrote, which he doesn't really go after Biden. He seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, and you can ask him directly, is he saying implicitly that we should rally behind Biden and the Democrats? Is that the
title of the article? Is that the world is the Reichstag? The Reichstag, for those who don't know, was the fire that Hitler and his coterie set on the German basically parliament.
Yep, and he blamed it on the communists.
And they blamed it on the communists. Hitler got arrested for that, but he got a light sentence. He was let out.
Not Hitler. That was you're thinking of the beer hall push, but
Hitler. I confused. That's a good point. I confused the beer hall push with the Reichstag. Bad.
Yeah, basically, there was a mentally ill Dutch communist who was blamed for the Reichstag fire, which Hitler used as a pretext to consolidate power in Germany after the Nazis came to power. And Adolf Reed is making a very specific historical allusion. He's not talking about no Franco, right?
Right. No, he basically is making the argument. I think he is making a Popular Front, United Front argument. Now, for those who don't know, what is a Popular Front and United Front? The Popular Front / United Front was a posture that the communists took in the United States during the rise of Nazism, that basically said that because Nazism was such a threat to the world, that instead of fighting the liberals in the ruling class in the United States, that the communists need to join with them to fight the Nazis. Some people argued that that was a logical option, that we fight in a united Popular Front or United Front with the liberals to fight the Nazis. Some argued that Popular Front, and I agree with this argument, spelled the death knell of the Communist Party and the effectiveness of the communists in their ability to influence American politics in this country. Can we get a link to the Adolf Reed article there?
Yeah, I'll...
Can you put it in the chat?
Do you have it? If you send it to me, wait, I can put it in the chat.
It's a non-site.
Non-site. I'll find it. Just one second.
I got it. 1 second.
Send it to me in the internal chat, and I'll
chat. Someone put it in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, you know what the problem is. It's like there's two. The communist movement followed two strategies in the interwar period in dealing with the rise of fascism. Okay, the original strategy was to fight against social democrats, the war, against social fascists, right? Because of course, the people who had suppressed the communist movement in Germany after the First World War had been the social democrats.
Right.
So the initial posture of the Communist Party was against cooperation, under the sort of direction of the Stalinized Comintern. The official line was to maintain a fight against social fascism, which was what they called social democrats. And how did that strategy end? It ended in Nazis coming to power, because the liquidation of the entire political left. But then on the flip side, what you're saying, what we talk about in the United States is the Popular Front strategy, which emerged in the 30s. Which, yes, I mean, not that there was ever a particularly strong threat of fascism not that there was a particularly strong threat of fascism in America, but it did lead to the liquidation of the Communist Party into the Democrats. So both strategies of sort of rejecting any kind of popular front and having a popular front have major pitfalls, because they kind of end up, with the left getting liquidated in one way or the other, either up against the wall or into academia.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of I'm not a big fan of the Popular Front strategy at all. And it seems like, if it's advocating, fascism has adapted to the American culture the same way communism needs to. We should stop looking to specific examples in the past as a litmus test for what is fascist today. I agree with that. Say it again, Patrick Leslie. The capitalist empire is the Third Reich. Patrick, with all that flashy, radical rhetoric, man. Patrick Leslie, shout out to you.
I think that's really interesting. I think the use of the term fascism in America is a way for Americans to externalize the history of far right politics as if it's something that appeared in Europe, when in fact I think there is an important dialectic at play in the formation of fascism, which is with the United States. If you read Adolf Hitler's writings, he
learned fascism from America.
Yeah, I mean, his model, there's a book called Hitler's American Model, which talks about racial laws. If you look at Lebensraum as a concept and the conquest of the East and the attempt to annihilate the Slavic population, what is the model? Native Americans. So, and if you look at sort of popular right-wing paramilitary organizations, what's the most OG fascistic organization in the world? Something like the KKK, original deal fascism. Oh, our boy is back. There we go.
I mean, this was actually something that I believe it was the great left intellectual George Jackson was making the argument, if I'm mistaken, that it's when was America not fascist for Black America? In terms of from the 60s period going backward.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. You basically have a paramilitary organization that and the apparatus of the state being used to maintain control of the Black population, through terror, through a reign of terror.
Yep.
And so that's kind of it's kind of a terrible. Because America is empire, right? To a certain extent, the American empire, imperialism was baked into the construction of the American state in a very visible way, in a way that it was not in a place like Germany, where in Germany you have imperial projects, but they're all overseas, whereas in America it's baked in, it's mixed up. But I think Adolf Reed is advocating the United Front. I will say that.
I think he's working on some politics. Speaking of electoral politics, Reed says in that article the most urgent objective for the Democrats to hold or expand their congressional majorities. I think that smells like some Popular Front, United Front type stuff. And I think he's saying that because he's afraid of the impending, quote unquote, fash turn of the Republicans taking control of the House.
And I mean, so here's the difficult thing, though. I don't necessarily I'm not even going to touch whether that assessment is correct or incorrect. I'll say this though: the Democratic Party itself has made it damn near impossible for that to happen.
What, a popular front?
No, to expand their congressional majorities, the Democratic Party and their ineffectiveness to get the things done that they need to do in order to win votes, they have made that almost impossible.
I hear you. Well, listen.
Because like that's at the end of the day, like the amount of lefties that you're going to be able to, dozens of lefties you're going to be able to convince with that argument ain't enough.
On that note, subscribe to the show, share with your friends, hit the bell, become a patron.
Come and check out the Discourse. It's all fun in the Discourse.
The
Discord. Marcus, do you want to join the Discord?
Yeah. Send me the link. I'll get in the link.
I want to make that Discord jumping. I want people to be hanging out.
Popping off. You gotta have make sure there's a good meme channel that I could steal for content for Left Flank Twitter.
We need good memes. We need a meme supply.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for attending this free show episode of Saturday. This is Revolution Podcast. While our main host, El Capitan, Jason Miles, is on vacation. We will be seeing Jason coming back next Saturday. So we have 2 or 3 more episodes. Pascal, do you come and hang out in the Discourse? In the Discord, Shirley, I might come out and hang out in the Discord. We'll be looking for you in there. Of course, we have to give shout outs to all of our supporters and our admirers. So, folks, thank you again. Thank you again for coming on. We will see you on Tuesday. I believe Tuesday is our guest is the economist Jack Rasmus with Asatar Bear.
Jack Rasmus and Asatar Bear. And then on Wednesday, there's going to be the premiere of Forrest's crossover show.
Movie night. Yeah, we're going to be talking about
JFK.
JFK. I think I'm going to be on that one.
Nice.
And
Thursday, who's coming on Thursday? Let me just look up who's coming on Thursday. I'll get that up ASAP. Sorry.
Thursday's guest
is, I hope we can get Heidi back at some point. She was great. Owen Schlack to talk about Canadian imperialism. And I think that will be.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Canadian elections are coming up too. So,
and by the way, next Saturday, when Jason comes back, September 4th, we will have the great Black popular culture expertise critic, musician, and artist, Greg Tate. It's the Discord, Janice, not the Discourse. The Discord. Do we have a link for the Discord that we can share?
Patrons have a link to the Discord. Yes, if you
patrons have a link. To the
only the patrons. It's a paywall.
Discord is for the patrons. Discord.
That's why Pascal's. We're going to put Pascal on the Discord a bit more so he can chat with people.
Okay.
He likes chatting with you guys. He loves doing it. He's like, but we have to help.
Yes, we'll be having Greg Tate next Saturday. Y'all, everyone's impressed. Greg Tate, wow. Yes, Greg Tate is going to be, is Black America defined by Black popular culture? That's going to be our subject question.
Woo.
Yes.
And we have, after that, we have a whole, the week after that, we got Luke Mayville on activism in Idaho. And then we've got Derek Vaughn to talk about the third and fourth positionism and are Nazbol's real? So we're going to be coming back to that old chestnut very soon.
If you are a patron, there's a link in the patron site to the Discord where you can sign on and engage in chat. Yes, and Greg Tate may confirm who is the greatest light-skinned R&B singer in the world, and I do not think it will be me. No.
Fair enough. Well,
on that note, folks, I think we can say it. We are